Did you squirt Batman?
Yeah.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. Just want to say hi to all my viewers. Bonjour, privet, guten tag, hola, ciao, and konnichiwa to my foreign viewers. This is the second part in a two-part series of knives through the 20th century, the evolution of knives through the 20th century. And we're looking at it decade by decade. We ended in 1945 with the war knives. And so we'll start up here with this knife. It's a Powell knife. And this is celluloid, but it is not celluloid dinos. It's celluloid actate. So by the end of the war, a different formula for celluloid had come out. Some companies continued to use celluloid after the war years, but it's a different formula. It's more stable, but it still had problems. So in the 1950s, by the end, that's the end of celluloid. Delrin came out and they quit using celluloid in the United States. Europe continued to use it though. All right, so now we're going to look at that time period, 1951 to 1960. And this is a time period when America is trying to gain back that quality that it once had. They have to be competitive, and so they're producing knives that are good quality, but not the same quality as the 1920s. They're trying all kinds of different things to produce knives less expensively. They're using manufacturer processes that use more machines, less people. They're saving money there. But also, like, this is a time period when the stocks of knives are going down. And so they'll just make a blade a little smaller than the stock of the spine. So it saves a little bit of money. They start cutting corners, like not cleaning up the inside, but they're pretty nice knives. This knife is made between 1952 and 56, and it's a fabulous knife. And this is celluloid actate that you see right there. 1948, Robertson starts producing bone, strawberry bone, very popular, very beautiful. This is a well-made knife. You can see nickel silver pins, bolsters, and liners. Very well-produced knife, and it's produced in the 50s, around 1955. So there's tremendous innovation going on in this period of time. The steel is better because the way that they're producing steel, and it's much cleaner. So it's still like a 1095 product, but it's just better steel because it's a better process for making it. This knife here is called a flame edge, and it's the first genuine tungsten edge on a knife. And this is a period when tungsten steel starts coming into knife making. That's just one of the innovations that you see. It's basically the space age. You can see here that even on expensive knives, this is stag. You can still find some bone and stag on knives, but it's greatly reduced and it's very expensive when you get it on a knife. This knife here is called a frozen heat, and originally this was a swing guard, by the way. So this knife doesn't have the swing guard, but frozen heat is a process, was the first cryogenic tempering, and that was developed by Robertson Knife Company. So today we talk about, cryogenically tempered knives. That process was still developed in the 50s by Robertson. So that's the kind of innovation that you're seeing during that period. This is a case knife that dates to that period of time, and they tried to replicate that bone that Robertson had developed, but really just kind of looked like red bone, and that's what it's called. Nice knife. This is a Schrade, another Schrade knife. This is genuine bone, produced in the 50s. And companies like Robertson catalogue this Schrade continued to use bone up until the 1960s. But at this point in time, you were basically down to 10 big companies. And most of them had quit using bone in favor of less expensive materials. All right, entering the 60s, this is the big news right here. So this is not a slip joint, but it's a lockback. It's the Buck 110. The Buck 110 revolutionized the knife industry within a very short period of time. This is a large, robust hunting knife, but in a very short amount of time, everybody was producing a model like this, and they started producing smaller models. And so if you have a lockback, I actually have one, I think, in the collection here. Yeah. If you have a lockback this small, this is penknife size, what do you need a slip joint for? And so that's how the Buck 110 revolutionized the industry. So not only are demographics continuing to move ahead, reducing the demand for knives, imports are kicking up, and the whole slip joint industry was starting to fall apart. This was the beginning here of the slip joint industry. This is a knife produced in the 60s. It's a case canoe, and it's just a fantastic knife. And you still had pretty good knives being made in the 60s, but they were starting, you can see here the top square is not cleaned up. This is the type of thing you start seeing in the 60s, around 1965, and it just kind of progresses from there. Knife companies are struggling to produce these traditional folders inexpensively enough to be sold. So next we're going to move on to the 70s, so that period of time from 1971 to 1980. So in the start of the 70s, as I mentioned before, you see a continuing evolution of lockbacks. This is a Kershaw. It's a Kershaw made before the Kai took over the company. So you're talking about the middle of the 70s, maybe 76, that this knife was produced. You can see it has torque screws in it. It's a rubber type material. It's extremely light. It's very strong. Has a different kind of metal in it than America was using. This is a Japanese produced knife. I think it's ATS 34 was what the Japanese were using then. And this is how, lockbacks are continuing to evolve and starting to dominate the market. This is also a smaller knife than the Buck. You can see right there, quite a bit smaller. Now, Buck also offered, the 112 and ended up offering smaller lockbacks than that in the 700 series. But, the knife industry is changing. They're moving to this right here. They're moving towards a modern tactical folder. In the knife, in the slip joint community, this is an Eyewitness knife. Came into the United States in the 70s. This is pre-code, so there's no model numbers on this knife at all. And it is finally made. And that's why German knives were coming into the United States, because American knife companies were making cheaper and cheaper knives, and there was a demand for that high quality knife. The other thing that starts in the 70s is knives like this. This is a Schrade. It's an inexpensive knife, and basically all they did is put some red scales on this and a nice pewter emblem. But other than that, it's a typical Schrade knife. It had a little etch in there. And what this is a collector knife. So knife collecting started come to the forefront as a hobby in the 70s. And so companies started making knives like this that would apply to the collector. You see Frost come out with this beautiful laminate, which was not new, but I think it was the first time it was used in knives, was Frost produced knives like this. And they're all geared to the collector. You get knives like this. This is a collector knife, and produced in between 76 and 78. Parker Frost again, but this is a Schrade produced knife, and it has bone. So this is the first time you're seeing bone in about 20 years in America. It's done really well, but it's not perfect. It's not like the knives in the 1920s. There's it's not highly polished. You can see it right there. You see the brush finish on this, but it has etching to appeal to the collector. And that was what was going on in the 70s. As you move into the 80s, let me just show this knife too. So this is your average knife in the 70s. Delrin jigged scales, looks really good, looks like bone. This is a well-made knife by Schrade, and Case is producing a pretty good knife at this point in time, and other knife companies are producing knives of a little less quality, like Camillus, Utica, K-Bar. Also, it's a time when you're losing a lot of companies. 1972, Case is sold. 1965, Robeson was sold. 1963, Cattaraugus goes under. And so you have that further consolidation in the knife industry to smaller and smaller group of companies that are producing traditional folders. We're going to look at the 80s next. And so this is a 1980 Case. This is would have been special. It's bone. So this is a time period when Case is starting to bring back bone a little bit. It has a nice mirror polish on this knife. This is a nice knife. So it's not perfect. There are some imperfections in it, but it's a pretty good knife. It's a little two-bladed jack. On the other side, a Camillus. This is Delrin, jig Delrin, and just all kinds of problems with this knife right here, and that's typical of American knives. And so you still have that collector push, and it's gaining strength. So you get knives like this, National Knife Collector knives. This is made by Queen, and people are flocking to these knives. It's when you see a lot of collector editions come out. This is a Parker, a Knife Club knife, Damascus steel, mother of pearl, really nice knife. No problems with this knife whatsoever. Very nicely made. And that's what you're seeing in the 80s. It's a time when you see fighting roosters come out. It's a time when you see Bulldog brand come out, and just a plethora of lesser knife collecting companies geared to the knife collector by themselves. So as we enter that period between 1991 and 2000, you just continue to see that slip joint market fall apart and the modern tactical folder evolve. It's a time frame when you see really cheap knives like this coming in from Japan, and this is just a little keychain knife, but it's typical. It's just a little plastic covers on it. You have aluminum Hold on a minute. Sorry, I had a brain freeze. Aluminum liners on it. They're really cheap. Coming in from Japan, coming in from China. This one's from China. And this is the kind of thing that's coming into America. You still have good knives being made. These are some Camillus knives here. They're okay. You know, they're not perfect. You can see there's a lot of problems with this knife, but this is the kind of knife that's being produced in the 90s, and this is just a acrylic covers on this knife. You can see how the back is not finished, and this is typical. So the other knife companies are producing knives like this. You still have some good knives being made, like some Schraden, some cases are still looking pretty good, but overall they're just cheaper and cheaper knives. Spyderco comes out in the early 90s with the Delica model, which this is not called a Delica, but this evolved to the Delica model, and also a model called a Workman model. These were lockbacks, but they used FRN scales. They had a clip on them. You can see the clip here, and you can open them with one hand. Now it's hard to do. I'm sure a young guy could do that no problem. With my big fat old hands, it's harder for me to open it with one hand, but you can do it. And they came out with the Endura model, which is easy to open by one hand. And that's the advent of the modern tactical folder. They're still mostly lockbacks. There was a few made. Kershaw came out in 1995, I think, with their first liner lock. So that was invented in 1981, I think. By Michael Walker, but you start seeing it crop up into knives, and I'm showing you pictures now. This is an Almar, but it's a new one, and I'm showing you pictures of the original one. And there's a big movement. Companies like Almar, Gerber, Kershaw, Benchmade are moving towards these modern folding knives. And that's what you're seeing in the pictures now. And that's the end of the 20th century. It was unclear whether slip joints would even survive. And as you move into the new millennium, really, it wasn't clear that they were going to survive then either. But that's a subject for another video. So I hope you guys appreciate the video. I hope you found it interesting, and I really appreciate all your support.